So the topic is around orthodoxy and kind of deconstruction. I feel like I personally have never heard the word deconstruction as much as I have in the last year.
Yeah.
It
was like a vague academic word
Yes,
from
it was.
Derrida, a French philosopher that nobody was aware of, and now it's like a cliche.
It comes off, from my experience, almost like it's you're a biblical Christian, you can grow in your faith and read, and then it's like deconstruction is like the next step of I don't know, like elevating your thinking. Is sometimes what it comes off as is what deconstruction is.
You're more enlightened.
Yes, enlightened would be a great word
Spiral
for it.
Dynamics, which is like, it's a book that's basically the Bible for progressive Christians and deconstructionists. Yeah. That's the idea, is that we've evolved. Well, think about the word progressive. The worldview built into that word is that there's I just read a great Orthodox, like capital or Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox writer who talked about evolutionary optimism was his language for progressivism. It's this idea that human history is on this evolutionary arc, and the progressives are the one that are ahead on that arc, right side of history would be the language. Therefore, more enlightened than everybody else. And the assumption is that everybody else will catch up to you if you're progressive. The problem is, like, that's not true. And so, so that's why progressives in a city like Portland cannot make sense of politics in America right now. So the only lens they have for it is, well, this must just be bigotry, or this must be, they have no lens. They can't, because that doesn't fit their paradigm. So it is very much a pretentious, I think very self-righteous and ignorant view that basically says we're more enlightened than everybody else. Which is why people that aren't progressives, in particular poor people in America, feel like judged, shamed, and they respond really badly because nobody likes to be treated with contempt.
Yeah. You know, we recently did these dinners across the country, like some in LA, some in Dallas.
Yeah, you were just in Portland, huh?
And yeah, this was
Thanks
my first
for not
time was
inviting me.
Dude,
I'm just kidding.
Well, I invited you with like 3 days notice.
It was too
I was
late.
just like, if I'm gonna text you, are you really
no,
gonna
that
like
was really
come?
kind.
But I should have. Then I should have invited.
So thanks for thinking of me last minute.
No, I should have. Next time.
There was like 4 Christians in Portland. You didn't think to invite me, you know?
You're the number one person everyone always said to invite. Like I just.
I'm so not offended. I'm just enjoying watching you blush.
So, when I went to LA, when I went to New York.
It's mostly your T-shirt that I love. Did everybody get this? I just want to bless this right there.
It's Tim McGraw, Faith Hill. The white tee I was gonna wear didn't fit. When I went to LA, and I didn't think I'd get to do a dinner there, but I was really encouraged to see the faith there and people kind of. It's been a hard year in LA or in, the California in general. And then New York, I really didn't think I'd end up in New York in 2020 or 2021. And I was really encouraged by like the grit and like the faith and all that. But when I went to Portland, if I'm being honest, I felt like a lot of people had been through a lot in Portland. And I felt like just with the riots, the tension, COVID, it was just
traumatic.
Difficult. And one of my questions, and then I want to open it up for you guys, is guys like you and John Tyson, who's in New York, and Dave Lomas, who's in San Francisco, you're in difficult cities to be bold in your faith, especially have orthodox, conservative, deep faith. Why have y'all chosen to do that? It's a place where I'm sure you get ridiculed often or just difficult to live that, because there's a lot of these guys that are in these areas or these industries that it's hard.
Hostile.
I'd love for you to speak to them on like, why have you chosen that? Why do you believe the next generation should fight for orthodoxy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound cliche, but I've chosen it because I've chosen Jesus. And I find him more captivating than anyone or anything else on offer. You have to live from a worldview. Everybody's living from metaphysic, you know, whether it's a secular ideology on the right or the left, those are an attempt to replace religion. You have to have a worldview to live into. Human beings cannot live without meaning and purpose. So even in my darkest moments, and I have a robust faith, but Peter's refrain is in my mind, to who else would we go? You alone have the words of eternal life. So the reason I'm not a progressive Christian is, well, first off, anytime you put an adjective in front of the word Christian, I'm out. And because at that point, you have perverted what it actually is. And so I'm not a progressive Christian for the same reason I'm not a conservative Christian in what that word has come to mean in the last 5 years. Because both of those are compromising complicity with what Jesus called the world. Yeah. And there's a right version of the world, and there's a left version of the world. The left tends to be more atheistic. The right tends to use the language of God to cover up their anti-God ideas and ideology. And I'm just not... So one, I don't think that's actually the real true Jesus. And the real true Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in the New Testament, in the best of the Christian tradition, which we have 2,000 years. And if you don't know church history, oh my gosh, you guys have to learn it. It will both humble you and it will captivate you. Read a book like Water from a Deep Well by Gerald Sitzer, and you will just understand that we're rooted in something ancient, that the cultural stuff we're living through, some of it's new, most of it's been around lots. It just has different language and faces right now. Culture will do what it does. It will go back and forth. It will go left. It will go right. There's going to be a massive backlash to the left in a couple of years, I would imagine. We're rooted in something so ancient and beautiful and true. And just at a very pragmatic, at an aesthetic level, I live, this is like my off-the-cuff unedited comment. I feel like the best case against progressivism is progressive cities. If you go to Portland or Brooklyn or San Francisco or LA, and if you put away your Instagram filter and you look past coffee and food, because we have the best coffee and food of anybody. Like, we know how to do street art, coffee, and food and fashion. But if you go past that and you actually look at the soul of a city, first off, if you look at the economic disparity, there's a thin band of like cool millennial people who made it. And who make a bunch of money and can buy a $7 coffee and Instagram it on their $1,000 phone. And if you look below that, it's mostly like very depressed, lonely, poor people. And the level of mental illness, the level of loneliness, the level of depression, the level of heartache, the relational breakup, the fallout of the sex revolution. When you have front row seats to watch it, it is not bright and shiny, it's not romantic, it's not cool. So I've been thinking about, why is Nashville such like a hotbed for deconstructionism? Which is so weird, like driving around. I know this is like liberal for the South. This is not liberal. This is not even close. And I'm shocked. It's like nobody's wearing masks. I've seen one pride flag in 4 days. I don't even have a category for that. I haven't seen any ideology anywhere. I don't know where the poor people are. I don't see any of it. This is not a liberal city. And maybe liberal for the South, but not. Trust me, it goes way down the path. And so this is my theory, and try this on, Grant. I've tried this on 3 Nashville smart people in the last couple of days, and they've all said yes. So I don't know if that makes it true. My theory is this. In this cultural context, you have enough of the worst of kind of Southern alt-right Christianity that is a massive turnoff, in particular for young people, whether it's white nationalism or whatever. Then you have the arts here, so you have artistic people tend to be more open-minded, creative. They don't like rules, they don't like boxes, which is part of the gift they bring to the world and part of the temptation. It's God's gift through them, and it's the enemy's temptation to them, because life without constraints is anarchy and lies and confusion. So there's enough people in the arts and exposed to secular culture, and they just don't like the kind of restricting nature of, call it orthodoxy or whatever. And then there's still enough cultural Christianity here that people can view progressivism as this nice, shiny thing where you can kind of sleep with whoever you want to sleep with and just be nice to people that have different sexual orientations and just not be judgmental and get along. It has this veneer, which isn't real, but it has really good PR. And there's enough cultural Christianity here that people think there's a future there. And I'm living in it. And let me tell you, it's not beautiful up close. There's some good things about it, but it's not beautiful up close. And there's no future there. There's this little book, none of you need to read. It's a very dry academic book by Rodney Stark, who's a famous sociologist from Baylor. It's called The Churching of America. And it's a very kind of dry academic work where he just goes through the data points of the church in America's history. Let me give you the 3 main takeaways from the book so you don't have to read it. Because progressivism, people don't realize, is not new. It's new at a popular level. It goes back to Germany. It's what Nazi Germany came from. Nobody wants to talk about that. But the moment you set aside the authority of the New Testament, you become your own authority. And so you're going to stand in judgment over against the New Testament with your own perceived sense of right and wrong. So you might end up on the left. You might end up being the Third Reich. At some point, there's no authority over you. It's just your own inner barometer. It's Adam and Eve, like, did God really say? And you redefine good and evil for yourself. That's the root temptation, is to define good and evil for yourself because you don't trust God's love and wisdom over your life. Yeah. That's the root of all sin, all evil and injustice in the world. So, Rodney Snark basically points, there's a couple major takeaways. One is that the most post-Christian America ever was during the Revolutionary War. People do not realize this. The height of Christendom in America was in 1962. If you just study things like church attendance, religious faith, profession.
I can see that.
For example, this is so not the homeschool conservative Christian world that I was brought up in, their interpretation of American history, but if you read like David McCullough or you read multiple historians, like the Revolutionary Army was basically like very sinful people, 500 prostitutes following them around. Most serious Christians in early America were Anabaptists, which means they believed in the Sermon on the Mount, and they believed that violence was incompatible with following Jesus, and they believed that the New Testament said you're to honor the king, so they refused to go to war with England basically over money and taxes. And so the Revolutionary Army would go around to these Anabaptist serious Christians, be they Quaker, be they Mennonite, and they would tar them and burn them alive in front of their families. So he basically paints this picture of early America as this, like most of the founding fathers are kind of an early version of atheists. They're very post-Christian, They're, Thomas Jefferson cutting up the Bible and all that stuff. Secondly, he talks about how, don't talk about that. Secondly, the most secular part of the nation was the South, and the most Christian part of the nation was the Northeast, which is weird for us because it's the opposite now, but makes sense of slavery. Slavery is a liberal position, which is weird because it's in a conservative culture now, but it's taking liberty with the teachings of the Bible. Wow. And it's hard for Americans to realize that certain social conservative positions are actually theological liberal, like militarism is a liberal theological position. You're taking liberty with the teachings of Jesus to adapt it to your culture. But it's a socially conservative position in America, so it doesn't map onto the left-right binary. So slavery is like that. So the South was the most post-Christian secular part of the nation. And then the end of the book, the third takeaway, this is I think he is a progressive, I'm not sure, but it's an academic book. It's not a Christian, it doesn't have a moral at the end of it. Yeah. But his academic summary at the end is basically liberal churches die, conservative churches flourish. By conservative, he doesn't mean like Trumpian. He means like orthodox, robust discipleship to Jesus. We believe that the New Testament is the authority over our life. We're following Jesus. We're discipling under Jesus in community. Yeah. Those churches flourish. So people are so confused because the progressive narrative is if you have to update the faith for the modern age. Mm-hmm. And that's just saying you have to kill the faith to be compromised by the world and end the faith and end your discipleship. So for most people, progressive Christian is a holding pattern on the journey to post-Christian. Not all people. Some people can hold that space, very few. Mm-hmm. So if you watch a lot of your friends go progressive, most of them will be there for a while, and then they will no longer identify as Christian, which is great millennial language. So that's at a very just pragmatic level, I don't think there's a future there. I would rather just go be a Buddhist journalist or something than try to be that. And I'm not going to, by the way. I love Jesus and apprentice under him. So,
y'all, this is so good for us. Yes. And seriously, he's spitting, he's dropping bombs, all of it. So what we're going to do actually is transition into leaders here asking you guys questions.
Now that I've offended everybody,
So there was someone who I think put a really good question that I think applies to a lot of us. They didn't put their name, but someone asked around empathy and practicing truth. If you can come up, if you know who you are, Nigel, and then Andrew Whitaker, if you can go second, and then Landon.
Hey, I'm Nigel.
Good morning.
And I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I write and I teach. Essentially, the question, if I remember it correctly, my Slido kind of closed. I asked how we can have empathy and hold space for people in their process of deconstruction while also speaking truth to power in that. Because, I mean, realistically, like, deconstruction is extremely necessary for the believer. Like, we can be real. Like, we all have doubts. We all have questions, curiosities about our faith. Do we really believe this thing? And if you don't, I just want to know how perfect your faith is and how it can be like you. But there are, like, the two sides of deconstruction. Like, you'll notice that some people just, like, want to sin. And it's like, I'm trying to deconstruct and, like, figure it out. And, like, you know the thing. But then the other side is like, no, like I realize that like God is very real. Maybe I have spiritually been manipulated by pastors. Maybe I did come from toxic theological systems. Maybe my grandmama was saved, and so like I'm saved too, kind of, because she prayed for me one time. And I realized that like my faith has to be my own. So the question essentially is, how can we have empathy for those who are deconstructing while also speaking truth to power and trying to encourage them in their process of reconstruction?
Nigel, I barely know you, bro, and I like you so much. You said so many things in there that were wise and profound. First off, that you would call speaking to a millennial or a Gen Z deconstructing speaking truth to power. Thank you for your awareness of that. I think you're on to all the right answers. So first off, I would really distinguish between doubt and deconstruction. Doubt is passive, deconstruction is active. Doubt is something that's happening to you, most of the time against your will, and you're trying to process it. Deconstruction is where you go, it's an aggressive stance. You go on the attack against Christian orthodoxy or the New Testament or the church or whatever. So I would separate those a little bit, though there's overlap. So this is what's helpful for me. This is just me channeling a few of my friends. Joshua Ryan Butler, if you've read his book, Skeletons in God's Closet, it's great if you have questions about violence in the Old Testament or hell. And my friend John Tyson. So there's the risk to what I'm about to do because it can stereotype people, and I don't mean to do that at all. This is an attempt to understand people. So there are about 5 major reasons that I see people deconstruct their faith, and you deal with each one differently. So the 5 would be this. 1, this would be the main one I see, people who've had a traumatic or wounding or bad experience in the church or in their family of origin. Most of the time in a conservative church, almost always in a conservative church. They had some kind of a bad experience. I just found out, I won't say his name, one of the most famous Christians who's publicly deconstructed their faith in recent years. I just found out that his dad was a pastor who was sleeping with their babysitter, and then his pastor had an affair, and then the pastor who replaced him had an affair. So like that screws you up. And I just have viewed this person as like an enemy of the faith, and I think this person is. But that just gave me compassion. Like, oh man, I mean, what would that have done to me if I'm like a 15-year-old kid and my pastor dad is sleeping with my, that's screwed up, you know? So many people have had everybody's had a bad experience in the church because part of the role of the church is to bring sin to the surface. That's a whole other thing. But people that have had a wounding experience. Second reason would be poor teaching. The church has a teaching function, and when people grow up under poor teaching, that can be a massive turnoff because what people are actually rejecting, they think they're rejecting Christianity or orthodoxy or Jesus. They're actually rejecting like a really bad version of Christianity. So, when people are brought up I don't want to get into a theological thing, but maybe some of the furthest extremes of Calvinism, when people are taught that, you were raped for the glory of God and for your good, which I think is a false teaching, or when people are taught that some people are created by God to burn in hell forever in conscious torment to God's glory, I'm like, whoa. You grow up, or just people are given really just shoddy theology. People will often react against that because, I don't want to be a part of that. That's not, and are we standing in moral judgment against God? Is that actually what Scripture teaches? But when you're taught, no, that's what Scripture teaches, then it's hard not to reject Scripture, Third reason would be what you just said. One of the things you said, many good things you said, would be that some people just want to sin. I don't know, like a nicer way to say that. But if you look at, the number of people that deconstruct, and then it comes out like, this is an older person example, but like they are divorcing their spouse, or they're actually in an open marriage, or they're living with their girlfriend or boyfriend. It's like, oh, I wonder if those things go together, So some people just want an excuse to sin without guilt. 4 would be, what's the 4th one? Sorry, I'm tired. I'm West Coast time still, kind of, sort of. 4 would be there is overwhelming social pressure to be cool.
Yeah.
And if you either are in any kind of a progressive environment, if you work for a progressive corporation, whether it's Nike or Delta or whatever, as progressive ideas have entered a lot of corporate America, or if you just do internet work, as I'm guessing a lot of you do, then there is massive social pressure on you to fit in with all the leftist ideologies. And to not, or even to be silent, not even to take a stand against stuff, just to not post certain things or say certain things, is like you're gonna. It's not a false perception that it will hurt your career. It will hurt your career. So Jesus, spoke about the Pharisees who actually loved him and believed him, but he said but wouldn't acknowledge him, and he said they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. Yeah. So some people, especially, not to like Enneagram people or whatever, but certain people for whom like the approval of others is deeply connected to their emotional well-being, find it incredibly difficult to stay orthodox when their coworkers or their boss or people on the internet will say horrible things about you. So what, you're a bigot, or so what, you hate gay people, or so what, you think people burn in hell, or whatever nonsense people say. And then the final reason that isn't talked about as much is I think there's like a satanic, demonic thing behind it. And Jesus said to Peter, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. So some people go through seasons of demonic assault where there's some kind of a full-on demonic pressure against their faith that is trying to rob them of any, and they might experience it as doubt, they might experience it as lies coming to them, as deconstruction, as the wrong friends, as attack on the internet. But some of that can be demonic. Like some people are demonic. I went through a season where I felt I almost lost my faith. I came really close. And in hindsight, it was a combination of poor teaching. I was reacting against some of the evangelicalism that I grew up with. And thank God for N.T. Wright and a couple other really good writers that honestly kind of saved my faith. And it was full-on demonic. And so I felt that scripture come to me, Satan has desired, but I pray for you that your faith may not fail. And I just persevered through it. And by the grace of God, I'm still here, and I deeply love Jesus. And my favorite part of my day is prayer in the morning. So not because I'm virtuous, just because Jesus is really beautiful. And if you don't know that yet, please get up in the morning and put your phone away and just sit and let Jesus love you. And it's really beautiful. So I don't want to stereotype people, but I think those 5 reasons are the most common. And my very long answer to your very simple question is just try to discern. And it can be a combination. It could be wounding and demonic, or it could be poor teaching and they just want to be liked. Try to discern what it is that you're dealing with, because you're going to interact differently. If it's a close friend who just wants to sin, you're probably going to be more like this. If it's a not super close friend who's been deeply wounded, you probably want to really hold space for their pain and validate like a lot of what they are deconstructing is actually stuff that needs to be deconstructed. And so, you know what I mean? Not throw out the baby with the bathwater. So I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
Thank you, man. I love the way you carry yourself in all this. Like, you have a humble confidence. There's places to be stern, but you have like this kindness. And I don't think all the leaders that we're seeing that are going more progressive are very loud about it, and all the ones that are, many of the ones that are staying true to like maybe the biblical, ancient, the Word of God kind of in a lot of ways, maybe are quiet, or we just don't have a lot of heroes in that world. So to see how you model that, our generation and Gen Z even more, it's like so hard when it impacts so much friends and family. Yeah. And so I think of even you talking about that intimacy with God and how that actually has to do with this too. There's a quote by Leonard Ravenhill where he said, no man who's intimate with God will be intimidated by man. And it makes me think of like that intimacy does tie back into having that confidence. And so we're going to go to the next question. Andrew, I'm going to have you ask it. If you could share what you did before, quickly, what you did before, what you do now, and then your question.
Is it still on? Yeah. So my name is Andrew Whitaker. Born and raised here, live and work in D.C. Formerly was in the Trump administration a Homeland Security advisor. My portfolio was Kenosha, Portland, and January 6th Capitol riots.
Wow.
Currently a senior consultant for a company called Deloitte. and I am small company.
I feel so outclassed right now. It's well done, man. That's amazing.
Consultant for the intelligence community.
And what was the last part?
Senior consultant for the intelligence community. So lots of.
So you're Jason Bourne, basically. That's amazing, right?
But so I have actually a lot of questions for you regarding Portland, and we can talk about that outside of this.
Yes, I have a lot of questions about Portland too. Mainly, how do I get out? No.
I don't know what security clearance level you have, but then we can talk about that too. But I have a question about the polarization of our country and the direction that we're going in.
Yeah.
There's people from all over the country right here. This next generation of disciples. I don't want to call them Christians because there's that blanket term of Christians. No, these are disciples. These are real Jesus followers. So,
yeah.
Man, how do we in this divisive and fragile time of American history where it doesn't seem like there's been like this polarity before, but it has. We've had this before multiple times, and the church has always overcome. How do we in this fragile time between progressive and conservative Christians or the left and right wing political polarization, how do we bring unity and love? I had literally a congressional candidate call me while you called my name out, and I hung up on him. He was like, I have news about the campaign. I'm like, dude, I don't want to hear about it right now. Because he's divisive. And a lot of these politicians are divisive about freedom and unity, but they don't believe it. They don't practice what they preach. How do we, as the next generation of disciples, actually go in and weave our church into the nation, into the state, that our founding documents, John Adams even wrote that it was for a moral and religious people. Anything outside of that, it's not for them, you know?
Yeah.
So how do we weave that into that? How do we weave the church into the culture of this polar time where everybody like hates each other? I've gotten canceled, you know? How do we stop canceling each other? How do we start loving people, you know?
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, well done. Great question. I want to be a little quieter on this one just because the poet Rilke has that line, we must live the questions. Some questions I think have really clear answers. Others, it's like, you just got to keep asking the right question, you know? And that's a question where different, really wise Christians have answered that question very differently at different times in church history. So your theology and your ecclesiology, just means like your theology of church, will really shape your approach to that question. Like if you're a Presbyterian or an Anglican or a Catholic, which has a much higher level for the church's involvement in the state, you're going to answer that question very differently than if you're a Eastern Orthodox or you're an Anabaptist or you're you're going to answer where there's a much lower comfort level for the church. Christians may be in the state, but not the church in the state. So I don't know if this is even a helpful answer, but this is a good idea. So there's this great book, you don't need to read it, but it's by a Christian historian called Destroyer of the Gods, which is this great quote from Polycarp. Have you ever heard of him? He's one of the early Christian martyrs in Smyrna, who was dragged before the Roman proconsul, the political officer of the day, the most powerful politician in his region. And he called him, "You are the teacher of all Asia, and you are the destroyer of our gods." That's really punk rock. Nobody's ever called me as a pastor like, "You are the destroyer of our gods." But that was this Christian's influence over all of Smyrna and what they called Asia, which is kind of Turkey area now. And anyway, Larry Hurtado has written this book called The Destroyer of the Gods about the fall of paganism and the rise of Christianity in the first couple of centuries. And he basically makes the point that it was not Christians' relevance and relatability that won over the Roman Empire, which is the bizarre social phenomenon historians can't make sense of, because you likely were to get killed for becoming a Christian. So this was there was a violent state-sponsored genocide against Christians for 3 centuries. Why would anybody become a Christian? So historians can't make sense of it. You know, if you're a Christian, you're like, well, because of Jesus. But if you're not a Christian, it's like, why in the world? It doesn't make sense as a social phenomenon. So Larry Hurtado's written this whole thing about how that came to be. In his basic case, it's not their relevance it's not that they were cool or they dressed well. It was their differentness and their distinctiveness that actually people were drawn to them because they were not like the culture.
Set apart.
And then he basically has this 5-point summary. And Tim Keller, has done some great writing about this, and part of it's in my book, but of 5 Christian distinctives in the Greco-Roman world. 1, Christians were multi-ethnic. and multiracial. So it was across Jew, Gentile, barbarian, which wasn't a mean word in that time. 2, it was spread across the lines of class. So there was free, slave, master, like different than our version of slavery, but there's all different kind of socioeconomic strata. 3, Christians were passionate, vocal in their advocacy against infanticide, which was a major problem, and abortion. 4, Christians were holding to the very ancient Christian sex ethic of channeling sexual energy through the covenant of marriage between a man and a woman until death do us part, which was even more countercultural and radical in that culture than it is in ours. People don't realize that. And 5, they were nonviolent until the 4th century. Tim Keller has this great point where he says the first 2 of those positions sound like, if you map them onto American politics, sound liberal because they're about race and class. The second 2 sound conservative because they're about, sex and abortion. And the 5th one doesn't sound like either. Nonviolence doesn't fit into either side or whatever. But those 5 distinctives are basic, one way of summarizing the moral positions of Orthodox Christianity. And so there's no political party or intellectual ideology on either side of our culture war that remotely holds those 5 things together. So whatever unity looks like, it won't look like just being nice in a partisan view of the world. It will look like holding to an alternative way of life. And how you do that inside a administration, I am the wrong person to ask. Justin Giboney is coming up after me. He is the right person to ask. And so I would ask and I would listen and take notes. I just feel like I have to say something, so that's what I said. But that's a great question, and I just want to have the not virtuous humility, but just self-awareness to say, that's a great question. I don't have a great answer for that, but I know that we do not map onto left and right, and so unity has to begin with us as the church, saying we are going to refuse to get sucked into this partisan war, and we're going to hold as the church to the way of Jesus, and we're not going to map on to the culture wars. And, if we do things right, probably neither side will like us. And so then how do you work in an administration or in a political apparatus? That's a great question that I would ask somebody who does what you do as a follower of Jesus, who's older and wiser. I'd ask them. I'm sure they would have better things to say than me.
Oh, I was reading yesterday that the verse, and it come to mind right when you said that, it's like you're probably just not going to win points. It is such a tension right now because we, especially for Christians or young people, is like dying to have influence, leadership, impact, which is biblical in a way. But then I was reading Jesus. I love a lot of the promises from God. One I saw yesterday, I was like, I forget that's kind of a promise, is that if you love me, they will hate you.
Yes. Nobody puts that in the pocket promise book.
It's I've never had it on a book. Yeah. It's not on a t-shirt anywhere.
They murdered the person we follow because he was a threat to the religious and the political power brokers of the day. And he said, take up your cross and follow me.
Yeah.
So whatever influence is, it's not, for a Christian, it's not popularity, it's suffering love. It's willing. I have a love-hate relationship with social media, which basically means I hate it. And so I keep almost deleting everything. And but then I'm wrestling with a couple of my friends. I feel a call to the church and beyond just my own church. And so how do you do that? And so all sorts of conversation there. But one of my friends said that John Tyson said the best thing to me, because I was basically trying to get him to give me approval to get off social media. And he said, I think our call in the future is to be crucified in public and not retaliate in kind. That's good.
Can y'all give it up for John Mark?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.